She's not her. She's the one who shot her. She's the one who shot her. Restraining order, but she shot her. The gun in the car. The gun in the car. Oh my fucking God! I'm paid in the car. How you feel? See this up there? Get up. You're scared as hell, all right?
Welcome to Crime Scene Chronicles, where we just don't follow the crime. We explore the mind behind it. Subscribe and stay with us, because some truths are hidden deeper than you think. A woman spends 91 days walking free after shooting another woman in the face in front of a 6-year-old boy. 91 days of breakfast, groceries, ordinary Tuesdays, while a family a few miles away buries their daughter. Then, without warning, she's arrested at her own front door in the suburbs. Months after that, a judge looks at the evidence and locks her up for good. No bond, nothing. And then, just weeks ago, in a twist almost nobody saw coming, that same court lets her walk right back out the door. An ankle monitor instead of a jail cell. If you think you already know how this story ends, you don't, because it hasn't ended. It's still being written right now, in real time, while that 6-year-old boy grows up without his mother. This is the kind of case that splits a comment section right down the middle. Some of you are going to hear the word self-defense and believe it, because you know how fast a domestic situation can turn deadly, and you know women are told for years to protect themselves by any means necessary. Others are going to hear what prosecutors say happened in the seconds after the trigger was pulled, and you're going to have a very hard time calling this self-defense at all. I'm not going to tell you which side to land on. I'm going to lay out exactly what's in the court record, what witnesses say, what the family says, and what still doesn't add up. You decide. Welcome to Crime Scene Chronicles. Stay with me, because this one does not go where you expect it to. It starts on a Monday morning that should have been unremarkable. September 8th, 2025. South Loop, Chicago, Cermak Road, just past State Street. School traffic. Parents double parked. Kids with backpacks bigger than they are. 31-year-old Romeca Meeks Blackmon had just walked her 6-year-old son through the doors of his school. She kissed him goodbye. She watched him disappear into the building, the way parents do every single day, without thinking twice about it. She had no idea it was the last time, because waiting for her in a car nearby was a woman she had never met in person. Quadajah Johnson, 31 years old, from Des Plaines, goes by the nickname Holly. Johnson wasn't alone. She had her 6-month-old baby with her, and she had her boyfriend, a man named Carlos Smith, sometimes known as Carlos Lososway. Here's where the knot in this story pulls tight, and you're going to want to keep track of it, because it explains everything that follows. Carlos was Romeca's ex. The 6-year-old boy who just walked into that school belonged to both of them, and Carlos was also, at that very moment, Quadajah's current boyfriend and the father of the baby in her back seat. 2 women, 1 man, 2 mothers of his children standing feet apart on a sidewalk on a random Monday morning, both of them tied to him, neither of them able to fully walk away from the other because of the children they shared. This is the part of true crime that isn't flashy, but it's the part that actually explains the violence. This wasn't 2 strangers. This wasn't random. This was months, maybe years of tension between 2 households built around 1 man, the kind of slow-burn conflict that plays out in text messages and custody handoffs and school pickup lines. Invisible to everyone except the people living inside it. Right up until the morning it wasn't invisible anymore. Witnesses say an argument broke out almost immediately. Words first, then it turned physical. A struggle between the 2 women right there on the street, right outside a school, in front of parents who had just walked their own kids through those same doors. Prosecutors say Carlos stepped in and tried to pull them apart. But somewhere in that chaos, Johnson broke away. She walked back to her own vehicle. She opened the door, and she came back holding a gun. Pause on that for a second. Not reached for a gun already on her. Walked back to a separate location, retrieved it, and returned to the confrontation. That single detail is going to matter more than almost anything else in this case, and we'll come back to exactly why in a few minutes. Then she fired. Not once. Witnesses describe multiple shots. One of them struck Romeca in the face. Think about what that scene actually looked like from the outside. A normal school morning. Parents still pulling up, still double parked, still half distracted checking their phones for the time. And then gunshots. A woman falling. Children close enough to a shooting outside their own school building that some of them may have seen it, or at the very least, heard it and felt whatever chaos followed. Police scanner audio from that morning captured the confusion in real time. A disturbance, a woman reportedly seen holding a gun, officers scrambling to figure out what had just happened on a residential stretch of Cermak Road. Romeca was rushed to Stroger Hospital. Doctors worked on her. It wasn't enough. She was pronounced dead, 31 years old, on a morning that started with her kissing her son goodbye at the door of his school. And then comes the part of this story that made an entire city furious. Johnson was taken into custody that same day. Chicago police brought her in. Detectives from Area 3 opened an investigation, and then within days, she was released. No charges. Nothing. She told investigators she'd acted in self-defense, that she feared for her life in that moment on the sidewalk. And prosecutors, at least initially, didn't move to charge her. Let that sink in, because this is the moment this story stopped being a local tragedy and started becoming a citywide flashpoint. A woman is dead. There are witnesses. There is video. And the person who pulled the trigger is free within days, back at her home in Des Plaines, while the woman she shot is in a funeral home. For a lot of people watching this unfold on social media in real time, it didn't make sense. It still doesn't for some. Self-defense is a real legal standard, and it exists for a reason, but it isn't a blank check. Under Illinois law, the person claiming it has to have had a genuine reasonable belief that deadly force was necessary to prevent death or serious harm to themselves in that exact moment. Walking away from a fight, retrieving a weapon from another location, and returning to the confrontation sits right at the edge of what courts consider reasonable, and often well outside it. That's the argument that was about to define the rest of this case. Put yourself in the shoes of Romeca's mother, Tina McMiller, for a second. Your daughter is dead. There is video circulating on social media, appearing to show the woman who killed her walking calmly back to her car, opening the door, and pulling out a weapon before walking back toward your daughter. And the woman who did it is sleeping in her own bed that night. McMiller didn't stay quiet. She started speaking to reporters. She said the only thing she wanted was justice, and she said it plainly, without asking for sympathy. Someone has to pay for this. A petition started circulating, gathering signatures, demanding the state's attorney reconsider. Community leaders stood beside McMiller and pointed to something bigger than one case, a state law about violence as a public health crisis, arguing this was exactly the kind of failure it was supposed to prevent. Because here's what people couldn't get past. Johnson had never even met Romeca in person before that morning. And yet months earlier, in December of 2024, Johnson had filed a protective order against her, one she never even had served. A protective order against a woman she'd never stood in front of. Family members on Romeca's side say there was a protective order running the other direction too, tied to Carlos. Two households, tangled together through one man's children, paperwork piling up on both sides, building tension for the better part of a year before it detonated on a sidewalk in front of a school. If you follow true crime coverage regularly, this pattern is going to feel familiar to you, and that's exactly why it's worth understanding, not just watching. Cases like this, two women connected through one man, tension building quietly for months before it explodes into violence in public, show up again and again across the country. They rarely make national news the way a stranger danger case does, because on paper it looks like a private dispute, a personal conflict between two people who knew each other, but the pattern is the same every time. Warning signs that look small from the outside, a protective order here, an argument there, get dismissed as drama until the morning they turn fatal. Romeca's case checks almost every box in that pattern, a protective order on each side, a conflict simmering for the better part of a year. And it's part of why so many people following it feel this tragedy was, in hindsight, sitting right there in plain sight. If you're the kind of viewer who likes untangling cases like this piece by piece, this is exactly the channel for that. So go ahead and hit subscribe now before you forget, because this case has more turns coming and you don't want to lose the thread halfway through. For 91 days, that's where the story sat. Frozen. Romeca's family showing up to community meetings, vigils where people held candles and said her name out loud so it wouldn't be forgotten. A petition circulating online, picking up signature after signature, demanding the state's attorney's office reconsider its decision not to charge Johnson. And underneath all of that noise, a little boy at his grandmother's house, far too young to understand court filings or self-defense statutes, just trying to understand why his mother wasn't coming home, while the woman who pulled the trigger carried on with her life a few miles away in Des Plaines, going to work, running errands, living a life that Romeca no longer got to have. Then, in December, 3 months after the shooting, everything changed in a single afternoon. Detectives went to Johnson's home in the 9200 block of West Senate Drive. No warning to the public, no press conference beforehand. They arrested her right there. Hours later, prosecutors filed the charge that Romeca's family had been demanding since the day of the funeral. First-degree murder, not a lesser charge, not a plea to manslaughter, first-degree murder, plus 5 additional felony counts stacked on top of it. The kind of charging decision that tells you prosecutors believed they finally had what they needed to make this stick. Johnson's first court appearance drew such a crowd that officials had to move the hearing to a different, larger courtroom just to fit everyone. Family, friends, community members who had never met Romeca but had followed her story for months online and felt like they owed her their presence in that room. Supporters showed up wearing pink, her favorite color, turning a Cook County courtroom into a wall of quiet, furious Greece, rows of people who had waited 3 months for this exact moment. And it was at that hearing that prosecutors laid out details that hadn't been public before, the kind of details that changed how a lot of people understood this case overnight. That when Johnson pulled the trigger, she didn't fire once and stop. Witnesses described multiple shots, fired in succession, and prosecutors told the judge something almost impossible to sit with quietly. That in the chaos immediately after the shooting, as Romeca lay dying on the pavement in front of a school, Johnson turned to Carlos and shared a casual gesture with him, a fist bump, over a dying woman's body, feet from where children were arriving for class. Sit with that detail for just a moment, because prosecutors clearly wanted the judge to. Ask yourself what kind of person does that. Not someone still in the grip of panic. Not someone who just barely desperately escaped a threat to their own life. A fist bump is not the reaction of fear. It's the reaction of someone who believes they won something. Prosecutors leaned hard into that same argument on the much bigger question hanging over this entire case, the question of self-defense itself. Their reasoning went like this. People who are truly, mortally afraid don't pause mid-attack to assess their surroundings and then continue firing. They don't casually celebrate seconds later with their boyfriend while another woman bleeds out on the pavement. To prosecutors, this wasn't a woman protecting herself in a moment of genuine terror. This was 2 people who arrived at that school already carrying a grievance, and only one of them happened to be the one holding the gun when it boiled over. Johnson's own lawyers told a very different story, and it's worth hearing in full because a jury eventually will too. They said their client had genuinely feared for her life that morning, caught in a volatile, months-long conflict between 2 women tangled together through one man's choices. They argued that the history between the 2 households, the protective order, the tension building for the better part of a year, meant Johnson had every reason to believe that confrontation could turn dangerous, and that in the heat of that moment, she believed she was the one in danger. They pointed to her pregnancy, 7 weeks along at the time of that first hearing, and asked the judge to weigh what it would mean to hold a pregnant woman in custody for years while awaiting trial. And they reminded the court that she hadn't fled during those 91 days of freedom, hadn't tried to disappear. She'd stayed local, cooperated when asked, and by their account, wasn't a flight risk at all. The judge in that first hearing wasn't convinced by any of it. After reviewing everything, the fist bump, the multiple shots, the walk back to the car for the gun, he ordered Johnson held, no bond, pending trial. For Romeca's family, watching Johnson taken back into custody felt like the first real piece of justice in a case that had already dragged on for 3 agonizing months. They believed finally this might move the way it should have moved back in September, the day their daughter died. Except this story wasn't finished delivering twists, and this next one is the reason we're telling you this case now instead of 6 months ago. Just weeks ago, Johnson appeared before a judge again, and this time walked out of that courtroom a free woman, released on pretrial conditions, 24-hour electronic monitoring strapped to her body, tracking her every movement, her passport surrendered, so she can't run, her firearm license, her FOID card, surrendered too, at least on paper, barred from ever leaving the state of Illinois, but free, awaiting trial not behind bars, but in her own home, sleeping in her own bed, exactly where she was in the days right after the shooting. A reversal almost nobody following this case predicted after that first devastating denial of bond just months earlier. Sit with that for a second because it matters, and because it's the twist that makes this story worth telling all over again. This is a woman charged with first-degree murder, a woman prosecutors say paused mid-shooting to keep firing, a woman accused of casually celebrating afterward with the man beside her, while another mother lay dying feet away. And she is, right now, tonight, living her life under an ankle monitor instead of behind bars, awaiting trial in the comfort of her own home. For Romeca's family, it's the exact same wound reopening, just wearing new clothes this time. The same question they were asking back in September, dressed differently in July. How does the person charged with killing your daughter keep finding her way back to freedom, over and over again, while your daughter never gets to come home at all? The man standing at the center of all of it and somehow, still standing entirely on the sidelines of the actual charges. He was there that morning. He is in every meaningful sense the reason both of these women were even on that sidewalk together at the same time. According to prosecutors' account, he tried to pull the two women apart once the fight broke out, attempting to diffuse a volatile situation rather than escalate it. That's the official version currently on the record. But plenty of people following this case online aren't fully satisfied with that account. And they're not shy about saying so in comment sections and group chats across the city. Why was he there at all, riding along with his girlfriend to a confrontation with the mother of his own son, with his 6-month-old baby in the back seat the entire time? Did he know tensions were that high? Did he think even for a second that this could end with somebody dead? Carlos has spoken publicly since the shooting, pushing back on some of what's circulated about that morning, saying certain details making the rounds online don't match what he says actually happened. He has not been charged with anything connected to Romeca's death, not as an accomplice, not for anything else. Whether that's because the evidence simply doesn't support a charge against him, or because prosecutors are still working through exactly what his role was that morning, is something only their office can answer, and so far, they haven't said. But for a man who was standing on that sidewalk when the mother of his child was shot dead, who left that morning with 2 women's lives torn apart around him, and walked away without a single charge to his name, it is a question this case is far from finished asking. Somewhere between innocent bystander who tried to stop it, and the reason it happened at all, sits the truth about Carlos, and right now, the public record hasn't fully settled which one it is. What never gets lost in all of this, underneath the charges and the bond hearings and the ankle monitors and the legal arguments about self-defense, is a 6-year-old boy. He walked into school that morning, holding his mother's hand, the same as any other Monday. He had no idea he was walking away from her for the last time. He is, in the cruelest possible sense, the reason both of these women were even standing on that sidewalk to begin with. The shared thread between 2 households that never should have collided the way they did. And now, he is being raised by his grandmother, a woman who has had to find the words somehow, night after night, to explain to a small child why his mother is never coming back, why she isn't at pickup anymore, why the holidays feel different now. Meanwhile, the woman charged with taking his mother from him is living at home tonight, checking in with an ankle monitor instead of a cellmate, sleeping under her own roof instead of behind bars. Somewhere down the line, a jury of 12 strangers is going to have to sit in a courtroom and hear about that boy, what he lost, what he'll never get back, every birthday his mother won't see, every school play, every graduation, every ordinary Tuesday she should have been there for. And they're going to have to decide, based on the evidence and nothing else, whether what happened on that sidewalk on September 8th was a woman defending her own life in a moment of genuine fear, or whether it was something much colder than that, dressed up afterward in the language of self-defense. This case isn't over. Not close. Johnson is currently out on electronic monitoring, awaiting a trial date that will decide the rest of her life. And if the pattern so far tells us anything, it's that this story is nowhere near done surprising us. Every time it feels like it's reached a resting point, a new hearing, a new filing, a new reversal comes along and changes everything again. So before you go, I want to know what you actually think, because this is exactly the kind of case where reasonable people land in very different places. Does Johnson's release on electronic monitoring feel like the justice system working the way it's supposed to, giving a pregnant defendant conditions instead of the cell before trial? Or does it feel like justice slipping backward again, the same freedom this family has been fighting against since September? Should Carlos be facing questions of his own by now, given everything that happened while he stood on that sidewalk? And when this finally goes to trial, what do you think 12 jurors are going to say once they've heard everything we just walked through? Drop your answers in the comments below. I read every single one, and I mean that. If this case moved you the way it moved all of us putting it together, I need you to do 3 things before you go. And they genuinely make a difference. Like this video so it reaches more people who deserve to hear Romeca's story and understand what her family is still fighting for. Subscribe to Crime Scene Chronicles right now if you haven't already, so you don't miss where this case goes next. Because between the trial date, the possibility of new charges, and everything still unfolding around Carlos, this is nowhere near its final chapter. And share this video with somebody, a friend, a group chat, anybody who needs to hear her name, because the more people who know what happened to Romeca Meeks Blackmon, the harder it becomes for a case like this to quietly fade into just another forgotten headline. That's the entire reason this channel exists, to make sure these stories don't get buried under the next news cycle. We will be back with the next chapter of this case the moment new information breaks, whether that's a trial date, a new filing, or a verdict. Until then, I'm signing off. Stay safe out there, and we'll see you in the next one.